Hi everyone, how are you? It's Dr. Cruz from Maximize Your Superpowers. How are you today? Okay, so I want to do a video today on a very important topic called attachment. Attachment styles. The concept I really want you to understand is it's the relationship the parent has with their child, right? What type of attachment do you have with your child, specifically in infancy and then during childhood, and then how that is going to affect the development of the child later on. So this is such an important topic, right? Attachment styles, attachment theory. If you want to do additional research on it after this video, research attachment theory, research John Bowlby, Bowlby. It's really, really important. I have seen even in my own life, as many of you know, I grew up in foster care. So I did not have attachments to my caretakers, to my primary caretakers, specifically to my parents, after I was 7 years old. And prior to 7, I don't know that the attachment was very healthy or not, right? And so we need to look at this concept called parent-child attachment, kind of in a holistic way, to see what type of attachment is being developed or has been developed. Is it healthy? Is it an unhealthy attachment? How does it become healthy and how does it become unhealthy? And what can you do about it at this point, right? And so when I particularly went into foster care, I had a lot of inconsistent living, right? So every year practically I was moving to another home. And that inconsistency, that turbulent living, that inconsistency in my school system with my peers, trying to focus on the schoolwork and the homework and, the curriculum always changing in school districts. It's very, very difficult for a child to develop healthy when not only the attachment to their caretaker is inconsistent or unhealthy, but then their lifestyle and their upbringing is also not only inconsistent, but also potentially the child is exposed to adverse exposures, right? Adverse environmental exposures, adverse behavioral exposures, like, and I'll talk more about it as I go in there, but unhealthy communication styles, yelling, screaming, fighting, throwing things, substance abuse, cigarette smoking, alcohol, domestic violence, sexual abuse. The more a child is exposed to these kinds of adverse elements in their environment, that also negatively affects the attachment the child has to not only the primary caretaker, but either caretaker, right? If whether parents or grandmother or something like that, right? So I want to start by just first saying this is a very important topic for everyone to listen to. And I'm really shocked, I'm really shocked. I have my PhD now, and I'm a mental health therapist, and I've worked with various populations from foster children, low-income families, military, severely disabled, severely mentally ill. I worked in a psychiatric hospital. I've worked in private practice. So I've worked with a variety of people, couples, with couples counseling, and I just don't really hear enough about attachment theory being discussed. Because don't you know, most of our adult problems stem from our childhood. something we either learned in our childhood or we were exposed to in our childhood. And it's a big deal. So all of these follow-on problems that people have stem from childhood. And if you dig back, peel the onion, it all starts predominantly with the type of attachment the child has with the parent, right? Predominantly. So if we can change the relationship, if we can educate parents, young parents, older parents, grandparents, on what it is that children, young adults, teenagers, people who are acting dysfunctional, what is it that they need to heal, right? And ideally, we want to give it to them while they're infants and children. But sometimes we, as adults, we don't come to our conscious awareness that, maybe we're dysfunctional until we're older, right? I didn't realize how dysfunctional I was as a mother until I was in my 30s. And so I dedicated my life, after my 30s, I dedicated my life to becoming the best parent that I could be, because my conscious awareness was awakened to how dysfunctional I was. And so I purport that a lot of people don't really realize how dysfunctional they are. They may mean well, they may think they're doing good as a parent, but maybe they're not, right? And so if they realize this later in their life, it's not too late. It's not too late to heal the heart of your child, to help redevelop their mind, to think better, to deal with their emotions better, to deal with other people and relationships and their peer groups better, right? It's never too late to really unconditionally love your child and praise them and explain to them where you went wrong and why it's happened, so they can get a conceptualization and not feel like they grew up unloved and uncared for and abandoned and neglected and abused and all these things purposefully. Like, we can not go back, but we can, in our adult years, once we fix ourselves, we can go back to our children and help heal them, right? At any age. It's never too late. That's why this attachment theory is really important, okay? All right. And I'll say this as I wrap up, my introduction. It's so important because, when we see these people who shoot up malls and people who shoot up school systems and these antisocial personality people, these people who hurt animals and dogs and set things on fire and kill their parents, and these people that have criminal behavior and just don't fit in society very well, we got to ask ourselves, how did they get that way? Right? Is it all a biological issue? Or was it environmental also? Was it just nature? Or was it nurture? And it's nurture is always the stronger of the two, right? Nature being like genetics, things like that, like things that you're born with, like illnesses and handicaps and disabilities you're born with. But environment, nature, is far more influential on a human being than nature is. Nurture is far more influential than nature is. Okay? So when we look at people in society that are not fitting in well, students that are loners and isolated and feel suicidal and depressed and all of this, and cutters, kids that are cutters, they cut their skin to regulate their emotions. Did it start with the attachment to their parents? Did they not learn how to regulate their emotions properly? It's very very much likely. It's very probable. So much starts with the attachment. So I'm going to get going, okay? All right, so let's see. I have here healthy attachment. The definition of a healthy attachment is the deep and enduring connection established between a child and a protective, loving caregiver in the first several years of life. It profoundly influences every component of the human condition: mind, body, emotions, relationships, and values. It's created by a reciprocal exchange of the infant's needs being fulfilled, thus creating trust and interdependence. So basically what's happening is in the first couple of years, or the first several years of life, so a healthy attachment is when this deep, enduring connection, this love, compassion, holding the baby, all of this is happening. And this affects this trust that gets built, this interdependency. The baby knows that they can trust the caretaker, and that they have a sense that they won't be abandoned. That this secure feeling that they get affects their mind, body, emotions. And as they grow up, that attachment helps to develop the relationship that they're going to have with other people. Will they get along with their peers? Will they get along with their parents? Will they get along with themselves? Right? And their values. Right? All of that starts at infancy. Whether your child grows up with high self-esteem or not, a lot of that has to do with this attachment that they have to the primary caretaker. A secure base. It's a secure base. So healthy attachment is a secure base from which the infant can explore the world. Right? So if I'm the infant and I have a secure relationship with my primary caretaker, my mother, for instance, or my father, that secure feeling creates a base from which I can feel secure as an infant. So that when I start crawling around on the floor and I become a toddler and all this kind of thing, I can feel safe to explore the world, right? That I can reach out to other children and play with them because I've had a secure attachment in my home. If I don't have a secure attachment with my caregiver, then, and I'm going to get into this later on, but fear, self-doubt, trauma, all of these things affect the infant in the brain, right? The brain becomes developed as a fear-based brain instead of a secure, healthy relationship base. And so the children can become two totally different children. The one with the healthy relationship and the healthy attachment, and the one who does not have a healthy attachment. They're going to go into life intermingling very differently with their peers, okay, and their siblings and everybody else. So children need healthy attachment behaviors to be exchanged with the caretaker, and these are some. Eye contact. These are things you can do with your child. Good eye contact. Look at the baby. Smile at the baby. Laugh at the baby. Make noises. Make noises. Play with them. Show them unconditional love. Touch them. Right? There is so much research that touch is very, very important for a human being to grow up in a healthy manner. They need to feel touched. They need to feel hugged. They need to feel loved. Laughing, smiling, giving them praise, giving them hugs. All of this is very important. When the child reconciles the question, how can I please me and please my mom, without feeling rejected, chastised, getting kicked out, abandoned, beaten, ignored, etc., trust is created. And this primary relationship that's built with the parents will positively affect the emotional and mental health of the child throughout their development, and have a significant impact on all future relationships. That's a big deal. That is a big deal. To this day, I have challenges energetically interacting with people, right? And it's not just from my childhood, but if you think about, me growing up in foster care, my parents were substance abusers, so I don't know what I was exposed to as an infant and all of that. But certainly at age 7, I saw a huge difference in my school picture from like age 3 to age 7. Age 3, age 7, I was like, I think my whole mouth was, and it was very like, I was tucked into myself, right? And I looked like an abused child, like literally. And so if you think about this, if the child doesn't know how to please mom and please themselves without feeling like they're going to be rejected in some way, shape, or form, and this could be at any age, right? Then the trust is not created. And if that trust isn't created, then that primary relationship with the parent then goes on to affect that child emotionally and mentally. Their emotional health and their mental health gets affected throughout their development. So throughout their life stages, not only in infancy and childhood, toddlerhood, childhood, teenage years, preteens, teenage, young adult, into young adulthood, and on into college and things like that. All of their behavior is predicated on this secure attachment or unsecure attachment. It's very important. Your relationship with your child is super important. Okay, so the loss or threat of loss of a caretaker can evoke intense distress in a child. So if a child feels like, if I do something, if I say something, and there is a potentiality that I'm going to lose my parent, whether they're going to get mad at me and ignore me, or, my mom's a prostitute and she leaves me at night, I'm losing my mom. If the child feels like they've done something and they've caused their parent to get sick and die, if the child feels like, if I'm bad and my mom doesn't talk to me anymore, my dad doesn't talk to me for a couple hours or a couple days, the child is perceiving that as a loss. And if they perceive any kind of loss of their parent, then that could evoke intense distress within the child. Now the child could begin to have stress and anxiety and potentially PTSD, right? Because they may feel like their life is going to be over if they lose their parent. So the child is trying to learn how eventually to become independent and still please their parent. They want their parents' love and support, right? As teenagers, I want to date this person, but my parent is saying, if you do, I'll never speak to you again. So the child is conflicted. I don't want to lose my parent because that could evoke intense distress. Now the kid goes running off with the boy or whatever and to live a dysfunctional life, right? So we don't want to make our children feel like they could potentially lose us, okay? We want to always ensure that they understand that we unconditionally love them, that there are consequences to their behaviors that they're going to have to deal with. But that doesn't mean I'm ever going to leave you. I'm never going to stop loving you. I'm your mother, or I'm your father. I'll always be here for you. And when they go to college, or they decide to go travel the world, or they do something that you don't agree with, you let them know, this is your choice. I'll always be here to love you, but this is your choice. If this is what you choose to do, I'm telling you, I don't think it's a good idea. But there are consequences, rewards and consequences. And if that's what you want to do, then that's what you do. But don't let them feel like you're going to abandon them, right? Abandonment is one of the worst things a child could feel from their parents. It destroys their life, right? So, moving on. Children are shaped by environment. This is hugely important. Every single thing you do from the time that child is even conceived, right? But let's talk about physical birth. Once they're physically born, everything you do, the child is receiving, right, through stimuli. And so children up to a particular age, they predominantly only have a subconscious mind, right? The conscious mind, as we know, isn't fully developed until they're about 25 years old. But I think until they're about age 7, the brain is receiving everything. There's no filter to stop information. So everything a child sees, hears, smells, touches, anything, it's going into their brain. And this information in their environment, whether you all are yelling, screaming, smoking, shooting guns, or if you're loving and playing games and, talking to them and having family time, whatever life you choose to have around them, that is developing how their brain thinks. And depending on how their brain thinks is going to determine how they interpret the world and themselves. Therefore, it develops their personality because it affects their belief systems, right? So the environment is profound on a child's development, okay? Human beings' development at all ages. I am very careful about the environment I'm in, right? Because I don't tolerate it anymore. I have to have a particular environment or I'm not going to be there. And but children, they don't have that choice. They don't have the authority. They're kids. They're helpless. They're at the mercy of their parents. So it behooves us to continuously get better as human beings and as parents, right? So when the attachment process is disrupted by environmental factors of caregivers, such as drugs, alcohol abuse, maybe it's a teenage mom, history of abuse, neglect, mental health issues or illnesses, abandonment, homelessness. So when the attachment process is disrupted by these types of negative environmental factors of the caregiver, these things could potentially render the caregiver unresponsive to the child, right? So, or negatively, or now the parent is negatively responding to the child. So if I have mental health illnesses that I'm not taking care of, or if I'm a teenage mom and I don't really know how to deal with this kid, so I leave it with my mom and I'm going out in the street to play and hang out, or if I'm on drugs, or if I'm drinking and I'm smoking, or I'm always on the phone, I'm ignoring my kid, if I'm homeless, all of these factors affect how we interact and respond to our children. So they can potentially render us unresponsive or negatively responding to children's needs, and that will negatively affect the development of the child's brain. Okay? So if you have a child and you're not developing that child properly based on the attachment that you have with them, your communication style, your behaviors, if you're not a healthy human being and you're interacting with your child and your child is taking all of this into their subconscious mind, their brain is being developed by what you're doing. This is critically important. I did not know this when I was a 20-year-old mother. It affects your kids and potentially generations, because now it's going to jump from one generation to the other until someone puts a stop to it. And that's why in my own life, I work so hard that once I started, at first I started reading personal growth and development books and self-improvement books, and I started learning about myself. Then I started learning about the brain, right? And once I started learning about the brain, I was like, holy cow, what is going on? I am a jacked up person. Like, I gotta fix myself. I didn't know I was a jacked up person, right? I thought I was just Capri. And so I had to change a lot of my behaviors, a lot of my communication skills, my interpretations, my perceptions. I had to change the people I hung around. I went to get my higher education. I got my PhD and studied mental health. I then went on to become a hypnotherapist because I love the brain, first of all. I just fell in love with it when I really understood you got a conscious brain that thinks here rationally, plans, has judgment, and then you have your emotional brain that's in the middle. If you do this with your hand, right, like that. So this symbolizes the brain. So the brain is built from the bottom up. So this is your brain stem, right? Or it resembles or whatever. Resembles your brain stem, right? And that's back here, right? Your brain stem. This is the first part of your brain that gets developed. And then this part here, this finger represents your middle brain, which is your limbic system. This is where your emotional regulation system is. This is where the amygdala is, and the fight-flight system gets activated, right? And your memory, short-term memories in here. And then this part of your brain is called the neocortex. This is the covering of the brain. This is your prefrontal cortex right here. So this part of your brain, the covering, the cortex, is where all of your like your logical thinking, your rationalization, your judgment, your decision making, all of that comes from. But it's the last part of the brain that gets developed, right? So children, infants, they're not really working with this part of the brain. This part of the brain is not really developed yet. It may be just a little bit, right? But this brain stem is what's keeping them alive. It keeps all of us alive. This is where our breathing occurs, or gets activated or whatever. The control center for our breathing, anything autonomic, our breathing, our blinking, our sneezing, our digestive system, our elimination system, our reproductive system, saliva production, all of that happens here in the brainstem. So when you're thinking about an infant, how we raise our children, how we interact with them, the attachment that we're creating with them is helping to create this brain and how it's going to function later in their life. Okay, so it's really important that we learn to be healthy parents. Oh my gosh. I got some statistics in here. I need to get going here because I got a lot to tell you all, but this is such an important topic. But, there's like 800,000 children being serviced by the child welfare system. Over 3 million cases of child abuse and neglect were reported in 2015. Can we just stop there? Over 3 million cases. This is 2015. So can you imagine what it is now? Because it usually goes up. It usually doesn't go down. Over 3 million cases in child abuse and neglect were reported in 2015. 1,670 children died from abuse and neglect in 2015. Up to 80% of high-risk families create insecure attachments in children. Up to 80% of high-risk families. Okay, what is high-risk families, right? Create insecure attachments. So high-risk families are people who are involved with dysfunctional relationships, dysfunctional marriages, alcohol abuse, substance abuse, domestic violence, all of this stuff that I've already talked about. Young teenage status parenthood, homelessness, abandonment, mental illnesses that are not being properly taken care of, right? So when attachment is disrupted, results can create profound long-term consequences for the child, such as absence of empathy. That's a big deal. absence of empathy, inability to modulate emotions, inability to give and receive affection, antisocial behaviors. Antisocial behaviors means that the person is so disrespectful that they violate the rights of others, that they violate the rights of others, that they will physically hurt other people, that they don't have any respect for the respect for other people, right? They're not just defiant, right? That's like opposition defiant disorder. Conduct disorder is, someone who might get in trouble, end up going to jail or something. But an antisocial personality is a potential psychopath, right? A potential sociopath. So that's a big deal. So when attachment is disrupted, it can also cause attention deficit, causing intergenerational transmission. So it can go on for generations, right? So grown children with attachment problems often become abusive, neglectful parents who also have attachment problems, right? So if you raise a child who had attachment problems to you as a child, when they become grown children and then they become parents, they're probably going to become abusive and neglectful parents because the cycle continues, right? This is why it's so important. We got to learn how to be good parents to the babies. We are developing young people while they're babies. We're developing the next young person it's going to become now while they're babies, right? So 3 categories of attachment styles. The secure attachment, which we talked about, which is children. So for instance, if you have a child and you leave the child at a daycare, if that child returns to the mother excitedly, then that child has a secure attachment with the mother, right? It's imperative for proper development of brain tasks and optimal human functioning. So a secure attachment, what it's saying is creating this secure attachment is imperative for proper brain development so the brain can do certain tasks properly, and for optimal human development and functioning over a lifespan. It all starts with the secure attachment as a baby, okay? There's also anxious/ambivalent attachment. It says kids are overly distressed by separating from their parent, whether in a daycare or something like that, and resists any comforting when reunited. Avoidant attachment is when a child is just disinterested in the mom when separated and rejects her when she returns. That's avoidant attachment. These mothers are inconsistent, unpredictable, and often angry and reject their children. So if a child is disinterested in their mother when they're separated from them and then rejects them when the mother returns, like from daycare or to daycare, it is probable that mother is inconsistent, unpredictable, and potentially angry in the household a lot and rejects the child. Secure attachment means you attend to the baby quickly, right? You show acceptance, cooperation, sensitivity, and availability. You always want to be available to your baby, right? It's your baby. Some people think, oh, well, I can't attend to my baby too quickly. They need to learn. No, not when they're babies, okay? Not when they're babies. It's too early. When they're infants, they need that secure attachment. They need to build that trust that you are there, that you're not going to abandon them, that they're safe, that you're going to be there to care for them. This is the mother and the father, okay? Don't leave your children with inconsistent fulfillment. Don't neglect your kids emotionally or otherwise. The infant-adult attachment relationship is the most important and profound developmental task the infant will ever achieve. Secure attachment during early childhood is necessary for acquisition of many social, emotional, and cognitive skills. So what it's saying is the secure attachment during early childhood is really necessary if the child is going to go on to acquire social, emotional, and cognitive skills, right? Are they going to learn how to interact with other people? Are they going to learn how to emotionally control themselves? Are they going to learn how to read people properly? Are they going to be overly sensitive, overly offendable? Are they going to learn how to think properly? All of this is necessary through the, not necessarily, but it's created through the secure attachment, right? So if a child doesn't have a secure attachment and they don't know where their parent is and they don't feel loved and cared for and there's no trust there, there's no reciprocation of, laughter and eye contact and playing and love and affection and all of that. If a child grows up being sent to their room and isolated and beaten and yelled at or any of all these things, then they don't grow up to learn how to socially interact properly. They don't learn how to love themselves. They don't learn how to accept themselves and therefore accept other people. They don't learn how to respect boundaries. They don't learn how to emotionally regulate what they're feeling. They don't learn how to identify their emotions. They don't learn how to regulate their behaviors. They often will act out. They won't learn how to think properly, right? We must learn how to think properly so we can behave properly, so that we can process properly, so that we can do all of these things that equate to becoming a healthy, productive citizen, right? Socially, emotionally, and cognitively, we got to get these skills so that we can learn how to be a productive, healthy citizen. If not, it's a potential we become an antisocial personality disorder, or this personality disorder gets created, and then we go around robbing people, stealing, killing people, not respecting boundaries, and becoming potentially a future criminal, So love your children properly, right? It's a big deal. It says, do this by parent-child engaging in continuous complementary interactions that are mutually satisfying to their needs. We already talked about that, right? To the child's needs, mutually satisfying interactions. So adverse childhood experiences. So these are the negative things that are going to negatively affect your child. Neglect, abuse, yelling, screaming, domestic violence, substance abuse in the home, dysfunction, physical altercations, acting an ass. I wrote that one. Don't act an ass in your house, okay? Moving a lot, so an inconsistent home environment, or moving with various people with inconsistent care. That's like foster care, right? That's what I experienced. Inconsistent care, inconsistent home life, instability in the home, instability in the school, instability with their father. God bless me. Emotional abuse, sexual abuse, PTSD, these kinds of childhood adverse experiences creates a negative working model of relationships and the environment. Excuse me. And the environment. So if a child is exposed to all this negative environmental stuff, then it develops a negative working model, an unhealthy negative working model in their mind about what a relationship is and how to treat other people and what kind of environment is okay to recreate in their own future, right? So we got to be very, very careful. I remember getting to a point in my life where I said, I'm never bringing alcohol in my home again, because I did not want my daughter thinking that it was okay to drink alcohol, right? I had been a bad example of a parent for a long time. I drank rum and Coke for a long time. And then when I realized, oh my God, this is dysfunctional. This is not healthy, right? I just said, no more. I don't want it in my home. I want a healthy home environment so my daughter can raise her children in the future in a healthy home environment. It was very important to me. Also, consequences. So the consequences that they could endure are social, emotional, cognitive impairment, antisocial personality, fire setting, animal herding, school shooters, becoming a school shooter, but just shooting people, right? Just taking their aggression and their pain, their anger, their pain, and out on other people in an aggressive way that ultimately potentially could take people's lives. Other consequences for being exposed to these adverse childhood experiences is engaging in risky behaviors such as alcohol, just not knowing how to regulate your alcohol intake. There are people out there that drink 151 Bacardi, or used to, and I was one of them. Drink 151 Bacardi from the bottle straight because they don't know better. They haven't been taught better. No one ever said don't do that, right? So risky behaviors is drinking a 24 pack of beer in a night. Like that, you could kill yourself, right? You could get alcohol poisoning and kill yourself with 151 and all these liquors, these 100 proof grain or 150 proof. Like, no, don't drink that stuff. It's not healthy. Other risky behaviors is smoking, cigarettes, taking drugs, just random drugs, any drugs. People just take drugs. They don't even care. They just don't want to feel what they're feeling. They want to feel high, and then they got to take something to feel lower, and then they got to wake up, and so they're taking more stuff. And you're taking so much stuff, you don't even know what you're taking. That's risky. Stupid. They could have unprotected sex. Very, very risky. Catch AIDS and die. And other incurable diseases like herpes and I don't know what else. Intravenous needles, especially sharing intravenous needles, shooting up heroin, shooting up bath salt or snorting bath salt. People do crazy things when they grow up in unhealthy environments, predominantly. Diseases, they could get diseases. So based on their behaviors, they expose themselves to potentially, disease carrying people or disease disgusting environments. They potentially could become disabled. Maybe more probably they could become disabled. They'll have social problems, and all of this is gunning for early death. That's the ultimate consequence, an early death. People's anxieties go up, or the child's anxieties will go up. Their alcohol abuse goes up. Their major depression disorder goes up in children who grow up in these adverse environments. And antisocial behaviors increase. All of this stuff, these are all consequences to an unhealthy environment and an unhealthy attachment with your baby. The brain doesn't develop properly, has psychosocial and emotional developmental issues. So again, psycho means, just the functioning of the brain and the way it thinks. Social is how do we interact? How do I gauge myself? How do I see myself in reference to when I see you? Do I know how to intermingle with people? Do I have a pleasing personality? Do I know how to control my emotions? Do I know how to read my emotions? Do I know how to read your emotions? All of this kind of thing becomes a problem for people who grow up in dysfunctional homes. And then there's children who get exposed to complex trauma. So complex trauma is kind of like chronic trauma. They're being consistently exposed to traumatic events and in different forms, right? So maybe not just screaming all the time, but there's screaming, there's domestic violence, there's drug use, you know, just, you know, all kinds of things. And so complex trauma affects all domains of development. So if you have a child and you're exposing them to these adverse childhood experiences, and within your environment you have they're being exposed to complex trauma, it can affect their physical development, their social development, their emotional development, their intellectual development, their spiritual development, their moral development. So if you have a child that doesn't have any moral development, they're not respecting anybody in this world. They're probably the jackasses on the highway screaming and throwing stuff at people, right? Or shooting up kids in the school. They don't have any morals. So it's really important. Or even children who curse out their parents. They don't have morals. Children who sleep around. Children who don't know their worth. And so they date people that they shouldn't. That is not equally yoked to them. That potentially could be very dangerous for them, right? And so potentially causing depression, poor peer relationships, general anxiety disorders, substance abuse and addictions, antisocial personality, borderline personality, academic failure, and poverty. There's a lot of consequences for not creating this secure attachment with your child and for not creating a healthy home environment for your child to grow up in. It's very, very important. My last page here. I'm doing pretty good. I'm under an hour so far. Abused children show significantly more assaultive, harassing, and threatening behaviors. They just don't have any respect for people. They don't have any respect for themselves. They don't have any respect for their parents because they were not respected. They were not loved. They were not cared for. And boundaries were not instilled. And so this is generally speaking, because I do know some children who were raised very well and they still turned out to be jackasses, right? So it's not all inclusive, but this is in general, you know, if you don't have a good, secure attachment with your child, if you don't show that child love and affection and care and unconditional love and build a trusting relationship so that the child knows that they can depend on you, that you'll unconditionally be there for them, that they don't feel rejected and isolated, and instead they do feel accepted unconditionally and they're not being abused, then you know, it's more likely they're going to grow up with those things, those morals, that spiritual understanding of who they are. They're going to have intellectual ability. They're going to have social cues. They're going to have social maturity, emotional maturity, and, you know, they're not going to feel like they have to fight to survive in life. You know, they don't have to physically go to school and fight because my dad just kicked my ass, you know, or kicks my ass every morning before I go to school. So abused children show significantly more assaultive, harassing, threatening behaviors. They alienate and avoid, so they alienate themselves and they avoid adults who could potentially help them. And when they do that, they self-perpetuate this cycle that they're in of more alienation. So they can never get the help that they need because they're alienating themselves. They're isolating, right? And that's because they don't feel secure in who they are. This often leads to a diagnosis of either reactive attachment disorder or disinhibited social engagement disorder. So basically what I'm saying there is that when the child grows up in that kind of unhealthy environment without a secure attachment, the child potentially could grow up to have a diagnosis of reactive attachment disorder or disinhibited social engagement disorder. Disinhibited social engagement disorder, without looking at the DSM for details, basically means that the child has a disinhibition of social engagement. So maybe they sit in, you know, a young girl will sit in a guy's, you know, a man's lap and not think anything about it. Maybe a little girl get into a car. The guy will say, hey, I got some candy. You want some candy? And the little girl goes into the car. And so just social boundaries are not there, right? And so I want to end with giving you a list of behavioral and emotional issues children suffer from when they have attachment problems. These are what most often manifest. Behavioral symptoms. Lack of impulse control. All right, so to be clear, when a child grows up without a secure attachment to the parents, without that trust and that love and that bond and that unconditional caring and the playfulness and the eye contact and the giggling and the smiling and all of that, when a child doesn't grow up with that and then instead they grow up in a dysfunctional environment with all of that stuff I said earlier, the drugs, the abuse, the abandonment, the homelessness, the foster care, all of that. These are many symptoms that they could most likely manifest in the child. Lack of impulse control. This is under behavioral symptoms. Self-destructive behaviors. Destruction of property. Aggression toward others. Consistently irresponsible. Deceitful. Hoarding. Hyperactivity. Poor hygiene. Steals. Inappropriate sexual conduct. Or inappropriate attitude, frequently defies rules, inappropriately demanding and clinging, abnormal eating habits, persistent nonsensical questions and incessant chatter, difficulty with novelty and change. The cognitive functions that most likely will manifest will be a lack of cause and effect thinking. That was huge for me. I didn't know how to think until I was like 37 years old. I reacted based off of emotion and instinct. I had not learned how to logically think. I didn't understand cause and effect yet. So that's a big deal. So lack of cause and effect thinking, learning disabilities, language disabilities, having a sense of self-importance that's grandiose, perceives self as a victim or helpless. Their affective or emotional manifestations may include not affectionate to the parents, frequently sad, depressed, helpless, rage, inappropriate emotional responses, marked mood changes. So basically mood changes. Social behaviors that will probably manifest for children who grow up in dysfunctional families is superficially engaging or charming, lacks eye contact and closeness, indiscriminately affectionate with strangers, lack of or unstable peer relationships, can't tolerate limits and external control, blames others for own mistakes, victimizes others who have been victimized by others. So basically they victimize victims. Lacks trust in others, exploitive, manipulative, controlling, bossy. Physical behaviors would be poor hygiene, chronic body tension, accident prone, high pain tolerance, overreaction to minor injury, tactile defensiveness, genetic predispositions, sleep disturbances, enuresis, and encopresis. And enuresis is when the child wets the bed, and encopresis is when they poop. Either in the bed or in places they shouldn't. That's not the toilet, maybe. Let's say it that way. Moral and spiritual issues that they may manifest are lack of meaning and purpose. So if they don't have a meaning or purpose in their life, lack of faith, compassion, and other spiritual values, identification with evil and dark side of life, and the dark side of life, lacks remorse, lacks conscience. And here it says children with severe attachment disorder sometimes exhibit cruelty to animals or preoccupied with fire. And these are a precursor to antisocial personality disorder. Violence, basically, when they show behaviors of violence toward others, especially helpless people, right? Bullies. That is potentially an antisocial personality in the development. Okay, so you want to pay attention to that if your child is a bully. Because if you don't get them the help they need now and nip it in the bud, they could potentially grow up and kill people, right? It's just the reality of the progression of sometimes how that happens. Okay, so today we talked about the importance of a secure attachment with between the child and the parent and the child. Okay, we have to teach, especially young people, if they have children, we have to teach them how to create that attachment, right? Don't just give the child off to the grandmother and the mom be gone. No, the child still needs that relationship with the mother or the father, okay? And the father. But if it's a single parent, whether male or female. Also, on a personal note, I feel like we really need to encourage these children. If you educate them about why they should not have children so early in life, I find that the education helps, right? So bringing awareness to their mind so that they can understand, listen, you don't have children yet. This is why. Number one, you're not fully developed. Your brain doesn't fully develop till you're 25 years old. You don't have the finances to take care of the kid. You don't have parenting skills. You don't have, ideally children, in my opinion, should be brought up in the home, not brought up in daycare, right? And so maybe that's something you want to really instill in your children. Something I instilled in my daughter, right? There's certain things I hope my daughter's not going to do because I really put my foot in her ass about it. And one of them was, you're not going to have a baby to go send that baby off to daycare. No, we're going to raise the baby in the home. So we got to figure out how that's going to happen before you have a baby, right? And thank God my daughter, she's 27 years old and she doesn't have a child yet because she's not ready. And I ain't raising no children, not by myself. You know what I mean? So we got to be proactive in how we're teaching our children to start a family. And it's important to educate them not to start a family until they get their life going first. Get your career, get your money, get your house. Get the foundation set. Learn what it is to have a healthy relationship with a significant other. It's not fair to be a single parent to children, right? Unfortunately, we have a lot of single parents. I was one of them. But it's not the healthiest. Ideally, a child should have two parents. They need two parents to develop ideally, right? So if we teach them this stuff early on, then this becomes their morals and their values. All right? All right. We got to be proactive, right? My name is Dr. Cruz, and I represent Maximize Your Superpowers. I really believe in if we educate ourselves, we learn about how this thing works in our head, our brain, right? We learn about what we can do to learn more about ourselves. Who am I? What is my identity? And how can I maximize my superpowers? What is my goal in life? Right? What is my vision? What am I here for? And a lot of that starts with raising your children properly. And if you weren't raised right, it starts with getting healed. So doing your work, reading the self-improvement books, getting a therapist, going to hypnosis to reprogram your subconscious mind, study self-hypnosis. Okay, we have to educate ourselves so that we can evolve. And I am a living example that it's possible because I lived in oblivion until I was 37 years old. I was still in a dysfunctional relationship where domestic violence was regularly happening, right? Maybe not physical violence, but it was fights, right? I'm throwing stuff, I'm cursing, I'm, doing crazy things. It's dysfunctional. But when my consciousness awakened, and this is why we need people in our lives to continue to mentor us and teach us and read books so we can learn, get edified, understand how other people live in life, a better way to live in life, right? And teach our children so that we can be the example for them. We have to continually evolve in a positive direction. But if we don't have those people teaching us, I didn't have anyone talking to me. I didn't have mentors. I didn't have parents. I didn't have family. I was by myself my whole life. So it took me a little longer to figure this stuff out. But once I did, I changed my whole life around. And you can too. I went on to get a PhD. I don't always recommend a PhD. It was just part of my path, right? It was something I wanted to do for the legacy of my family. And because my girlfriend was getting one, I was going to get one. And, we thought it was a game. And so we got our PhDs. And, and I wrote a few books. And I went on to open a nonprofit. And I promote literacy to foster children. And I go speak to them. And I'm a public speaker. And I'm an international psychotherapist. And I'm overseas right now. Right over the beach. Having a good old time. Right? I changed my life around. I decided, like I told you earlier, I wasn't going to bring alcohol in the home anymore. I struggled to not smoke anymore. I started wanting to exercise, right? I wasn't being forced to exercise in the military anymore. I wanted to exercise. I wanted to feel healthy and happy. And I got all dysfunctional people out of my life. All of them. I put up boundaries. No, you cannot come over here. And I took care of myself. And I took care of my daughter. And I became a very good example for her. And I became very spiritually astute. And I figured out my spiritual identity. And I rooted myself in God. And declared that I have limitless potential. Right? That I have the Spirit of God living in me because He created me. Therefore, I am that I am, right? And I just changed my life around. And so you can do that too. If you've grown up in foster care or you've grown up in dysfunction, if you're not living a healthy life, if you're in a domestic violence relationship, if you're doing drugs, if you're just jacked up, if you're suicidal, if you're depressed, if you're lost, if you don't know what your purpose is, if you feel defeated, you can change your life around. You can change your life around. And I recommend that you start with reading As a Man Thinketh. It's a 20-page free PDF online. That was one of the first books I ever read, changed my life. You can also read The Ultimate Secrets of Total Self-Confidence by Dr. Robert Anthony. You could also read Cybernetics. You could also learn how your brain works. That's very, very important. And all of these books I've just recommended will help teach you how the brain works. But you really want to get in there and understand the prefrontal cortex, the limbic system, the brain stem, the cerebellum. What is all these pieces to my brain, the occipital lobe? What are all these pieces to my brain doing in me? How are they affecting me? How are they keeping me alive? How are they helping me to regulate everything that I do every day? I honestly believe that learning about the brain is the very most important thing that we should do, because it is what makes all of us possible. Without a brain, we die, right? We can't function without a brain. So we got to know how it works and what it does. So once you learn about your own brain, then you can learn about, if I'm acting up and I'm like emotionally erratic, okay, I know my limbic system is activated. My amygdala is on, and what's happening right now, right? If you learn that your thoughts are created through brain cells communicating, and the more they communicate, the stronger that neural connection becomes. And this is where the phrase neurons that fire together wire together. Because the more often you do something or see something, like in a domestic violence home, the more I see domestic violence, the more I get this neural connection in my brain that's activated, the stronger it gets, the more probable when I grow up, I'm going to do the same thing that I saw, right? I'm going to replicate this dysfunction. And vice versa. If I see a loving relationship between my parents, then that is going to get stronger, and it's more probable that I'll have a healthy relationship when I grow up. So learning about your brain is critical. Okay? All right, I'm going to stop there. I thank you all very much. Again, I'm Dr. Cruz from Maximize Your Superpowers. If you want to know more about me and the stuff that's on my website that can help you, specifically, I talk about the subconscious and the conscious mind because I'm a hypnotherapist. It's capricruz.com. All right? And I encourage you greatly to do your own research on attachment theory. Okay? Dr. John Bowlby is the most prominent theorist and contributor to this theory. All right. So I will talk to you all next time. And if you have any questions, please post them below, and I'll contact you with the answers. Okay. Bye-bye.